The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Finding a job in today's competitive work environment is not an easy task for young people, especially those who are out of high school looking for a job with benefits, some on-the-job training, advancement potential. Our guests today are from the Employment Action Center, a nonprofit human services organization serving the West Suburban area. Associate Director Jan Levin and Job Development Specialist and Youth Counselor Pat Edwards will discuss some of the strategies they use in helping young people develop job interviewing skills and job search skills. One of Employment Action Center's successful young clients, Matthew Wintz, will describe how he utilized its services in making his career decisions. We're delighted to have you here with us today. Jan, why don't you describe a little bit about Employment Action Center? Tell us about some of the programs and the kinds of people you're serving.
Employment Action Center is a private nonprofit organization. We're a division of MRC, Multi-Resource Centers, and we have employment and training programs throughout the metro area. Currently, we're operating 15 programs throughout the metro area. And our mission is to help people who are unemployed or underemployed to achieve self-sufficiency through employment. We operate a wide mix of programming geared to different populations, such as youth that Matt has been a part of, dislocated workers, people who are receiving some form of public assistance, mature workers, special women's programs, a whole variety. And the common thread is that people are looking for employment to gain self-sufficiency.
When you talk about the mature workers, you're talking about people who've had jobs and perhaps
Right.
lost them because of changes in the company.
People who are 45 and older, who have usually long, solid work histories, who have been caught up in the times that are going on today, and for many who have found themselves unemployed for the first time in their life after being with a company 15 or 20 years, for example. Many of our dislocated workers are in that situation too.
Must be one of the most discouraging things, so your counselors work with them to help them redefine their job skills?
Actually, it's really not discouraging. It's quite exciting because many people, when they find themselves in this situation, take the opportunity in working with the counselors to look at their skills, do a reassessment. They're at a different time of life than maybe at 22 or 23, and are looking maybe at some totally new career changes that would be very viable options for them.
What kind of funding sources do you have for the programs?
Actually, our funding comes from a variety of sources. We have funding from the federal government, funding from state government for special projects, funding from the counties. We have funding from foundations such as McKnight and United Way funding, private contributions, such as some of the corporations in town have contributed to certain funding, as well as certain sliding fee scales for different types of programming that we have for people who don't fit into any of the other categories, perhaps.
And as I understand it, the type of program depends on what sort of funding source?
Right, the type of, well, not only what type of funding source, but some of our programs are designed for specific things. For example, we have a Skills 2000, which is a workplace literacy program. It's designed for people who do not have the academic skills to actually compete in the job market and who need work on that. And we're doing that in conjunction with the Bloomington Public Schools. We actually have teachers coming in to help people improve their reading and their math skills. to make them competitive in the job market. And then we work on the employment issues of finding employment sites for them.
So collaboration with other community organizations
Yes,
and
definitely
agencies is
so.
real.
Definitely so.
What area do you serve particularly?
Well, we actually have programs throughout the metro area. The program that Matt was in is through a federally funded program through the JTPA, Job Training Partnership Act. And we work with adults and youth in the western suburbs of Minneapolis, from St. Louis Park all the way out to Navarre, Mound, and areas such as that. And we work with people to help them find full-time, permanent employment.
You said you wouldn't turn someone away if they weren't in your service area. You'd make a recommendation.
Right. For
or do a
example,
phone call.
most people will fit into some of the programming that we have within 15 program areas. But if we had a youth come in, for example, who lived in Bloomington that is not in our service area, we would then refer that youth to the appropriate vendor who is serving that area to make sure that people are not dead-ended, that they don't have any other resource that they can go to.
Pat, you're a youth counselor. What are some of the things that you do to get young people who maybe haven't had very good luck getting permanent employment or don't have the academic background that they need? What are some of the things?
What do I do for the clients?
Yes.
Well, once they come in, we screen them a little bit to see if they're eligible. And then
what kind of screening do you do?
well,
in terms
basically what Jan was saying before is the area. Are they from the right area? Have they been working? It varies slightly from depending on
Person to
help me out,
person,
person
right.
to person here.
Right.
It's-
They would have to be living in the western suburbs, and there are income guidelines for JTPA that we have to take a look at. What was their household income for the past 6 months? For many people, they're living alone, and so they're considered a family of one, and we go by the government standards in terms of what we can take a look at. And there are exclusions and inclusions, and that's on an individualized basis. So if someone were to come to us, we would take a look at all of those factors and make sure that we could work with them.
By youth, are you talking about young people under 18 or under 21?
Our youth range from 16 to 21. And we don't compete with the high school. We don't want to take young people out of high school and find them full-time employment. We aren't a summer youth program. We find full-time employment for youth. And so, in fact, if they haven't completed their high school education, that's something we really urge people to do, urge our youth to do. So we're not competing with that. It's full-time employment for youth that are looking for full-time employment. There are people 16 that aren't in high school anymore for whatever reason. Some have gotten their GEDs, some are working towards their GEDs. And then we try to find them employment, full-time employment.
The other point too, and Pat mentioned this, is that we're very linked in with community resources and do everything we can to encourage youth, if they're out of high school, if they've dropped out, to get their GEDs, and we're very much aware of resources within the community so that people can be referred to these resources to complete their GED. We were just talking about that in the car on the way over here.
Well, Matt, you're a wonderful success story, I understand, from this program. How did you find out about?
Well, I was talking to my cousin, and he had been in there approximately a year ago, and they found him a very good job. And he told me to go down there. I was having some problems, and came down and talked to Pat here, and she set things straight with me, and found me a good job. And
That must have taken some courage to make that initial phone call. What happens when a young person like Matt walks into your office, Pat?
Well, Matt's the perfect client. He's somebody you'd like to have 10 of them walk in every day. He was ambitious, he was clean cut, he was bright, just the type of client you'd love to have. We do some testing and to find out what he's maybe what he'd want to do. He and I interview for quite a while, and I ask him what experience he has, what he'd like to do. We not only talk about the goals right now for getting a job, but what do you want to do kind of for the rest of your life? What do you want to do with yourself? Matt was marketable. He didn't need a lot of training to get him working right then. He needed work right then. It wasn't something like he said, I want to train for 6 months and then go to work. Matt needed a job. And so was that the first interview you went on? The only interview you went on? Or maybe you went on two?
You got a job in
No,
your
that was
first
it.
interview?
Yeah,
How
that
long
was
had you
it.
been working with Pat before you got the job?
Approximately a week. And,
Wow.
we had gone over.
So I said, Matt's a dream. Matt was a dream.
And she knew exactly what the employer wanted, so she went over like an interview, like she was the interviewer, and went through some questions that he'd probably ask, and then I gave my answers, and she helped me where she could, and that was the biggest thing, was the interview, getting through the interview.
Wow, that's a real scary thing for,
Yes,
for
it is.
anybody who's applying for jobs. So you went marching off and you got hired off the bat?
Yeah.
May I see you later?
It was really exciting because
was.
we do have workshops that we give for our adult clients and on interviewing skills and job seeking skills. And the youth seem to work better on a one-to-one basis. Matt and I sitting in his office, and I said, okay, now what if he asks you this, and he might ask you this, and we kind of went over, those questions that are really hard when you're out on an interview, like tell me about yourself, and what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths. And so we went over some of those questions. I had worked with, Matt's employed by Border States Electric, I can't remember. And I had worked with them in the manager, Lex Silbernagel, I can never say that name right, had called me before, and I had gone out to his office and looked at his facilities and to see what he needed. It just, when Matt walked in, I thought, oh, this is Border States Electric written all over him,
So even though you didn't know you were particularly interested in electronics, you
yeah.
got there, and now you're
Yeah,
even considering
yeah.
going on and getting a degree and becoming an electrical
I thought about
engineer.
that, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Warehouse is what he was in.
Yeah, I'm in the warehouse now, and then, they're a big company. There's places to go. That was the nice thing. Some places, you get in there and you can only go so far, but in, a company of this size and everything, it's real nice. I can go up to sales and go right from there.
So you really see the future.
Yeah, that's what's great about it. Yeah.
Changing. That's fantastic.
He had a good opportunity. It's a wonderful company. They were real easy to work with.
Well, how do you find other companies like that? Do you go out and actively
Some we
search?
call. We've been really busy lately, and I haven't done a lot of just cold calling out to companies. In this instance, he called in and said he needed help, and I went out and looked at his facilities. I kind of interviewed him to see, what programs they had, what were their benefits, what exactly did he want, and I felt I really had a good. I kind of knew what he wanted. I just had a feel for what he wanted. And so when Matt went out on the interview, I kind of thought, this is a match, the minute they went out. Well, then later that night, I had Lex call me at home, the manager there, and I called him and I said, have you made a decision? I was just so excited because I just felt it was so right. And he said, I'm doing that right now. And I said, are you in the middle of an interview? And he said, mm-hmm. And I said, oh, okay. So I hung up. And he called me right back, and he said, you know what, I'm going to go with your person. And the reason being, he interviewed so well. And we went over that interview just before he left, so I thought that was really important.
That helped a lot.
Yeah.
Because it sticks in your mind. Otherwise, if you just go in there and he asks you a question, you got to think about it for a minute. But if you can just pop up with answers, it really helps.
That shows the prospective employer that you have been thinking and that you are articulate.
And he was
work on your
aware
feet.
of the questions he'd be asked.
I was interested when you said with young people it works best on a one-to-one basis, and the more mature workers seem to prefer the workshop. Do you think that's because young people are more...
I think it's self-conscious.
You do?
That's just my
They're
feeling.
not. The younger people are more self-conscious.
And I think more mature people are used to being in group settings in a lot of different areas. It's like if you were in school to stand up and do something in front of people, you didn't like to do it. But when you get older, you can stand up in front of a few people and say something. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think it's just more personal. Like when Matt and I were just sitting in my office saying, well, what are your strengths, or what are your weaknesses, or what kind of where do you want to be in 5 years? The questions that employers ask.
You get more out of it, when you're one-on-one.
One-on-one, sure.
Yeah, because it's not, you're not talking to 500 people. You know, they're not talking to 500 people. They're just talking to you. So, you know, it sticks in your mind.
And
much
they're more
better.
free to ask questions. They're not going to say, well, what if I do this and no one's going to laugh? I mean,
Yeah.
it's he and I, or the client and I, and I'm interested in getting them a job just as much as they're interested in getting a job.
Well, I think that that's a real important point here, that both Pat and Matt are talking about relationships here. And when youth come into our office, there's usually an anxiety, if you will. They need to get a job right away. There might be personal circumstances going on, and there is a low patience factor, if you will, to be scheduled for example, a group workshop. Whereas when the youth come into us right away, Pat is starting to work with them, and they have that relationship building and that connection that they know they're going to get assistance immediately. So with our youth, we primarily work one-to-one. Obviously there are exceptions, and the same for adults. Sometimes with adults we will work one-to-one, but we do have group workshops that seem to be highly beneficial for large numbers of adult people who come into us, and really gain a lot from the interaction within a group. What we really try to stress is the individualized nature of our programming, and we will take someone where he or she is and work from there, and whatever they need, whatever composite of services that are going to be appropriate, we will work with them. I think Pat mentioned too that Matt came in and was highly employable, didn't need any training at that point. We do have limited training dollars to assist people in short-term training opportunities to make them more marketable. Sometimes people come into us not knowing at all what direction to go in, and we'll do extensive aptitude, interest testing, that type of thing, to help them make some decisions in terms of what direction they should be going in.
I imagine it takes a certain amount of motivation just to make that phone call and come in for an appointment. How do you work with people of any age who maybe aren't quite as, I loved your use of the word, well, you use marketable.
Well, I believe there's a job for everybody. I mean, every client that comes in, there is a job for them. And as far as how you work with them, sometimes it takes a little more patience. Sometimes it takes a little more creativity to find a job that would be right for that person. But nevertheless, we do find one. I mean, I believe there is a job for everybody. And it's really funny too, like the youth that come in, most of them know pretty much what they want to do, and they definitely know what they don't want to do. I don't ever want to do this, and they know for sure they never want to do it. And you know, it's kind of interesting to say, why? Why don't you want to do it? Well, my brother did it, and he doesn't like it, or so-and-so did it, and they, you know, I mean, they have a story about it, but they really know what they don't want to do, too, which is easy. I mean, if you don't, if you know what you don't want to do, at least you're eliminating something.
But I imagine a lot of it, too, is giving people options that they hadn't considered before.
Right.
Do you find the employers are excited when they're working with people who've come through your program and see how motivated and committed they are?
They really are. For instance, when Matt went out, Lex called and said, I'm kind of using this as an example because, you know, to bring all your
He
files.
was brave enough to come
Yeah,
out.
he was brave enough and good enough to come for us. But yes, he was. He was impressed with the way he interviewed. He was impressed that he cleaned up for the interview. I mean, you know, some people don't. And so he was impressed by that.
And the other thing too is that many employers, and we have built relationships with hundreds of employers in the Twin Cities area, who will call us when they have openings as opposed to our constantly doing the cold calling to them, although that is a large part of our role too. Part of our job and part of the trust that employers have with us is the fact that we're doing pre-screening, if you will. We're working with people to making sure that we are not going to call this employer unless we feel that there is going to be a reasonable chance of a good fit here. So we've done a lot of work before that phone call is made to that employer to help the client to set realistic job goals, to take a real good look at themselves. What strengths do you have? What skills can you offer to a potential employer? So one thing that it's commented on for us is that employers say that our people that we send out really seem to know a lot about who they are and what they can offer. And that's half the battle. Not only knowing it, but as Matt said, being able to talk about that. What can you do for that employer?
And they help you to set goals also. That you know, everybody has to set their goals in life.
I think too, you asked what can we do when they're not quite as marketable. But Jan mentioned we do have limited training dollars. And some people, that's what's going to get them a job, is to have some kind of training. Even if it's an introduction to computers or whatever it might be, that's what's going to help them get a job. If they are completely unskilled and have no training in anything, it's to our advantage to train them too, and to theirs. So,
What kind of outreach do you do to let people in the community know that this sort of a program is available?
A variety of things, actually. We run ads all the time in the local newspapers, the Sailor, the Sun Sailor newspapers in our service area to let people know who we are. 4 times a year we do a flyer, if you will, that is inserted into these newspapers. We do public service announcements. We contact different community organizations and distribute our brochures and our flyers and so forth. We have relationships.
You
with,
leave them in the library too, I hope.
Yes, we do. We have relationships with different school districts where I've actually gone out and spoken to the guidance counselors. We have relationships with the alternative schools. And Pat herself goes out and talks to the counselors and does presentations and so forth. We have relationships with different treatment centers and so forth in the community. So we're constantly brainstorming to tap into as many areas of the community as we can to let them know where there is a resource for them.
How big a staff do you have to do this monumental amount of work?
Well, Employment Action Center, as I say, has 15 programs within the community. What we have for the youth program is one counselor, job developer, Pat, who really
Works
does
40
a
hours a
superhuman.
day.
Yeah, works 40 hours a day, basically. We have several counselors on staff and several people who will, for example, we have workshop facilitators and so forth. Pat and others are not expected to do all of that kind of thing, so we try to regulate that. Employment Action Center actually has a staff of close to 70 people at this point, cut across all programs. So we make sure that people are getting the appropriate individualized services that they need.
Matt, have you been able to hustle up any of your friends to
Yeah,
get
actually, I
involved in the
have
program?
sent a friend in. Yeah, I've told many people about it. It's I feel it's real good for the community, and it helps you if it,
Well, I would think a success story like yours would be a real incentive to other people.
And it makes
to
me
get
feel
involved.
real good. They're always, that she calls all the time and sees how I'm doing, and she can help out with, with
kind of
anything, really.
backtracking, we maybe should have asked this first. Before you started with Employment Action Center, had you tried looking for some jobs and just hadn't found anything?
Yeah,
that was
I looked for, I was
kind
out
of
of
a
work
dead
for about
end?
2 months, and I had looked everywhere, and it was, it was hard to find a job that I wanted to have. And I was, I was getting real insecure. I didn't know what to do. I had to pay rent and
Well, sure.
running low on money, and I figured I'd try this out. Many places charge you money, and I mean they charge you more money than you make. So not.
Well, that's because this isn't an employment center.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a real
yeah.
This is a-
comprehensive
Right,
program.
and we always stress to both our participants and to the employers that there is no charge for the service. So we really have a strong credibility with our participants as well as with the employers. They know that we're being impartial about it. We're not an employment agency.
Sounds like a great program, and we're going to leave your number on the screen when the program is finished. So if people have questions or are interested in the program, you can give them a call.
Great.
And you'd encourage anybody, men or women,
Men,
young people, old people,
Right.
middle-aged
Anybody
people.
who
Yeah,
is
anybody.
unemployed, looking for
Nobody
work,
is too
to
desperate.
give us
huh?
a call. Right.
That's fantastic. Thank you all very much for being with us today
Thank
on
you.
All
Thank
About
you.
Kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Celine by Brock Cole. Celine is a 16-year-old high school junior whose artist father has gone off on an extended tour of Europe, leaving Celine alone with her 22-year-old stepmother, Catherine. Catherine is not overjoyed at the situation and just barely tolerates Celine in her antics. All Celine wants to do is survive the school year so that she may go to Italy and spend the summer with her friend Sybil. To do this, all she has to do is show a little maturity, something that's harder than she first realizes. Show a little maturity. Really, it's not hard to be offended. If I were any more mature, I'd have Alzheimer's disease. No, shortly I will be drifting over the hills of Tuscany, my box easel strapped to my back, the Mediterranean sun bronzing my brow. What possibly could go wrong? Well, there are several things that could go wrong. Celine had not counted on having to rewrite her paper on Holden Caulfield. She had written the original during the commercials of Soul Train, but then that proved to be a little bit too distracting, so she changed to the cable station where all they do is sell jewelry and radar detectors. And then there's Jacob, her 8-year-old neighbor, whose parents are in the midst of a divorce. Jacob is first attracted to Celine by her television set. He doesn't have one. And then by her honesty. Celine is there for him. She tells him the way things are and is totally honest with him. And then Dermot gets in the way too. Dermot wants to be Celine's boyfriend, but Celine could care less. And then there's a party that Celine gets roped into going to with Dermot and 2 others. Celine doesn't want to join in the party scene and becomes more and more disillusioned as the evening goes on. It all ends, however, when the school beauty throws up inside her clothes in order to save face. Cole has written an intelligent, thoughtful, genuine young adult novel in the tradition of J.D. Salinger. As Hazel Roachman of Booklist magazine has stated, Celine is a 1980s Midwestern Holden. Celine is a typical 80s adolescent, spouting flip, wry comments one moment and then letting us know how really painful the lives of young children are these days the next moment. She's trying to find truth and honesty in a phony conformist world. Cole has captured the way we look, the way we speak, the way we are in a most surprising book.
Celine by Brock Cole, reviewed by Wendy Woodfill, Children's Services Librarian at the Minnetonka Community Library. A good choice to tie in with the subject of today's program, young people searching for what best to do with their lives. Thanks to our guests, Jan Levin and Pat Edwards of Employment Action Center, and to Matthew Wintz for being with us on today's All About Kids. And thank you for tuning in. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency.